There are a lot of different factors that made Confederation almost inevitable.
This again is Professor Patrice Dutil.
There was a lot of pressure in North America for something to crystallize north of the American border. The first factor is the American Civil War. It had a jarring effect on the British North American imagination because something was going to emerge out of this catastrophe. The North was likely to win because of its military might, its industrial capacity. And what would happen to a fortified United States?
It was complicated also by the fact that the United Kingdom took sides in the war.
There's a geopolitical game happening that really concerned a lot of Canadians and Canadian politicians. So you've got the U.S. factor looming large. You have the UK factor. The United Kingdom did not want to be associated with Canada in a political way anymore. Canada was seen as a burden. Great Britain wanted to focus on other aspects of its empires, in India, in Africa, and other places where they were really curious and eager to develop their energies on other continents.
And then there was the driving ambition of a lot of businessmen and politicians in British North America.
There's a business community, there's a political community that has its eyes focused on the West, on that great territory called Rupert's Land.
This was an area encompassing 3.8 million square kilometers, roughly 1/3 of present-day Canada, which at the time was exclusively controlled by the Hudson's Bay Company.
The question was, how do we get that thing? How do we establish a presence out West? How do we fix our own political problems? And, there were a lot of stalemates in the United Province of Canada. We're changing governments roughly every 18 months. It wasn't stable. It wasn't attracting capital the way people thought it should.
By 1864, there was a movement to unite the province of Canada, made up of Canada East and Canada West, now called Quebec and Ontario, along with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia.
Maybe Prince Edward Island, maybe even Newfoundland would be a good idea. Create an internal market, so to speak.
On July 1st, 1867, Canada, once a collection of British colonies, became a confederation. And for the first time in history, citizens from what we now call Ontario and Quebec, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, were called to vote for a federal government, one that would supposedly speak for all of them. And it could be characterized as uneven progress at best.
You look at the election of 1867 and you discover the vitality of various arguments that really showed that Confederation was not a done deal, that Confederation was not something of a consensus.
Patrice Dutil recently published Ballots and Brawls, the first book about the 1867 election.
Joseph Howe had no allegiance to this idea that government should run out of Ottawa. Like, what for? We have nothing to do with Ottawa. What's the point of that? Other people like Anglin in New Brunswick, a liberal, really had no interest in tying New Brunswick's affairs to Ottawa, drowning the New Brunswick identity into a Canadian identity. That made no sense. And of course, in Quebec, there are lots of people who were very concerned that tying the fortunes of the people of Quebec, the Francophone, Catholic, into an entity that was overwhelmingly English and Protestant was going to spell the doom of the province, of the people, of the French-speaking people on the British North American continent.
The 1867 election would be about more than choosing a federal government. It would be a referendum on the very idea of Confederation, with Sir John A. Macdonald as the leading voice for a united Canada. And as the title of Dutil's book suggests, that first election was a rough affair, punctuated by violence, intimidation, bribery, and bitter regional divides. Dutil notes that by today's standards, it was a completely undemocratic election.
The accepted figures for participation is about 15%. 15% of the population was allowed to vote in 1867. So you're talking about males of a certain age who owned property. 15% of the population does not make for a very sound legitimization of a project like Confederation.
In 1867, to vote, you had to be male, 21 years of age or older, and own property.
you're turning towards an electorate of white males. There's no issue here of getting women involved. There's no issue here of getting indigenous people involved. That's just not even on the agenda.
In many places, voting didn't happen on a single day. It could stretch over weeks, with the results coming in before all ridings had a chance to vote. Meaning, political parties could shift their strategy as results rolled in from other ridings. And sometimes force could be used to get the desired results. And with the exception of New Brunswick, it was an open ballot.
In other words, you showed up at the poll and you swore allegiance to the Queen and you said, I vote Liberal or I vote Tory or I vote for this or that person. That was the way it was done. And so your vote is public.
Eligible voters could be voting under the watchful eyes of their employer, their landlord, or an enforcer from the opposition. The open ballot system allowed for corruption, intimidation, and violence.
And if you're not sure, if you're basically on the fence, if you're susceptible to a bribe, because there was bribes, I'll give you a quart of this or a gallon of that, or maybe a few bucks here. The whole thing was by our day standard, corrupt. People were open to emoluments, to do a little sweetness here and there. How much it made a difference, we don't know. And did every party do it? Absolutely, every party did it. And was there corporate funding? Absolutely, there was. We know there was. We just don't know how much there was.
In Quebec, the powerful Catholic Church encouraged or warned those among its flock how to use their vote, especially in rural parishes. Protestant groups in Ontario did the same. On Election Day in Kamouraska, the contest between conservative and liberal factions became particularly heated. Supporters of opposing parties clashed in the streets with reports of physical assaults, threats, and disruptions at polling stations. The chaos escalated to the point where authorities were unable to maintain order, and the election in this riding was eventually cancelled. Kamouraska remained without a representative until a by-election could be held in 1869. Following the 1867 election, John A. Macdonald and his Conservative Party would form the first federal government, having received strong support in Canada East and Canada West. In New Brunswick, the vote was split, but in Nova Scotia, well, that was another story. Out of 19 seats, 18 were won by anti-Confederation candidates, including Joseph Howe. Still, there was no going back. The government formed and Confederation remained. The 1867 election marked the birth of federal democracy in Canada, but it also exposed the challenges of participating in a democracy, and it would influence the future of our elections.